Good morning and welcome here. My name is Rick, and I'm one of the pastors here at Lighthouse. And today I want to ask you a few questions. And again, kids, this is not just for the adults, this is for you too, so pay attention. Here's the questions. Have you ever faced a problem so big it just seemed impossible to solve? Or maybe you encountered a need that was so great you just felt like completely unable to meet that need. Secondly, how did you respond? How do you respond when you face a problem that you know you lack the ability and the resource to solve? It was 2012. No, that's wrong. That doesn't exist yet. It was 2012. Karis and I had just been married over a year, and we had just purchased our very first house. There's a picture of it. In the old west end of Winnipeg, Manitoba. I think that's even my basement roommate's car that got in there. It was a small 90-year-old character home, which I think, Lori and John, correct me if I'm wrong, is just marketing lingo for fixer-upper. But it sounds nice. But while it needed a lot of updates eventually, it was mostly move-in ready. And this was really important for us at the time because A, I did not have any experience in any kind of home renovations. And B, we really didn't have extra margin in our budget to plan for any kind of surprise renovation. And so we were really hoping and praying that this house would not give us any kind of bad surprises. But if you've ever owned an old house, you're laughing at me right now because they all have surprises in them, right? The week we took possession, we found some mold spots on the bathroom wall. And at first I thought, no big deal, right? Let's just clean it with some bleach, small problem, small fix. But that did absolutely nothing. You see, the mold was not just in a few spots or on the surface, it was coming through the walls. It was behind the walls, and it was everywhere. And as we peeled things back, it was black mold. We ended up having to tear out the entire bathroom right down to the studs. That is a picture of it. Did I mention that we only had one bathroom in the house? I remember staring at that empty hull. Tear down was easy. I can do this, right? But I stared at that empty hull and thought, now what? And I was just so keenly aware of my lack of resources and lack of knowledge or skill to solve this problem, and I felt completely overwhelmed. Maybe you've experienced something like that too. Maybe not in a home reno, but maybe you felt useless knowing you can't do anything to solve a serious health condition of a loved one. Or experiencing the complete lack of control when suddenly losing a job and not knowing what's next for you or how you're going to pay the bills at the end of the month. Or that sense of inadequacy that I think any honest parent gets at times in raising their kids. Kids, do you ever feel like at school maybe there's just that one subject that is just too hard for you? Or there's a bully that you feel powerless to overcome? Teens, do you ever feel overwhelmed by the pressure of that question that everyone asks you, what are you going to do after high school? All the while you're still just trying to figure out how to navigate high school, where you fit in, who you are as a person. And then there's the problems out there in our city, right? In our country and beyond in the world. When I look at our own drug problem in our city and the houselessness that results and the politics and the economy and the justice system of our country, I tend to feel like any effort that I put in to help is just pointless because the problem is so big and I am so small. So how do we respond when we encounter an overwhelming problem that we are unable to solve? Our story in the Bible today is about that, and I think it can help us begin to answer that question. If you have your Bibles or your Bible app, you can open it to John chapter 6, the Gospel of John chapter 6. You can also follow along on the screen. And if you're new or visiting us at Lighthouse today, we are in a teaching series through the Gospel of John this season, and I've try to shorten it and keep it geared towards our younger audience today. But John is one of the 4 books that tells us the story about Jesus in the New Testament. And John tells us that his whole reason for writing his account of the story of Jesus is to convince you, the reader, that Jesus really is God in the flesh, that he really is the creator of the cosmos, and that if you trust in him, you will have an epic life and life beyond the grave. So with that short recap, let me just set up our story today. Jesus had been gaining a following because lots of people had had God sightings. They saw Jesus perform miracles, and John calls them signs. He doesn't call them miracles. He calls them signs because they're not just random tricks or circus acts. They're meant to show us something about who Jesus is and something about God's kingdom. And so Jesus was gaining a following. And in our story, he's wandering through the wilderness in Galilee, around Cana, and there's a large crowd following him. Let's pick up in chapter 6, starting in verse 5. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, one of his disciples, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we would not have enough money to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that with this huge crowd?" "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. And then Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. And afterward, he did the same with the fish. And they all ate as much as they wanted. And after everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, "Now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." And so they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. This is God's word. What is the overwhelming problem in this story? There's a large crowd of people following Jesus in the wilderness where there is no Dairy Queen, there is no A&W, there's no 7-Eleven or Superstore, there's nowhere to get food. How big was this crowd? Well, the story says there were 5,000 men, but there weren't just men. The other Gospels tell us that there were women and kids, and Bible scholars say there could have been up to 20,000 people there. I think that's maybe what it could have looked like. Can you imagine you're hiking in the wilderness, in the country somewhere out here, and all of Corona, Petrolia, and Wyoming combined, all of the people from those towns are following you in the wilderness. That's right, I did the math, I looked it up. And can you imagine, they're all hungry, there's nowhere to eat, nobody has a car, they're all hungry, and then Jesus leans over to you, says your name, and says, "Hey-o, where should we buy food for all these people?" How would you respond? Well, in this story, we get 3 responses. Let's see if you kids can follow along what the 3 different responses to this is, and see what we can learn from it. The first response is Philip's. He was a friend and follower of Jesus. And Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, Jesus, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." He's probably thinking, "Jesus, I don't know how well your carpentry business is doing right now, but I'm just a fisherman trying to get by, and the Romans are taxing me quite high. I don't have any extra. The need is too great. I don't have enough. It's impossible." But the writer of this book tells you guys a little secret that Philip didn't know at the time. Here's the secret. He said, Jesus was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Jesus already knew that he was going to perform a miracle and give people enough food to eat. So I need a bit of participation, kids. Why do you think Jesus tested Philip? Anyone? Throw it out there. Anyone? Why would Jesus test Philip? Do you think maybe he was trying to give him an exercise in trust and faith? That's right. He wanted him to believe. He wanted him to have some trust, right? To grow in faith. And you know, if you read the Bible, you will find out that God actually frequently tests his people. He doesn't always jump in right away to solve their problems. Sometimes God takes people actually through some really hard times. Sometimes he steps back and lets people work some things through. Why does God test his people? Why wouldn't he just immediately jump in and fix all our problems? Well, Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, he suggests this. He says, is it possible that maybe God's priority is not to solve all of our problems, but rather to shape deep roots of character and patience and hope and trust in his people? Kids, sometimes we as parents do this to you intentionally. Sometimes we jump in to solve a problem you're having, but sometimes we step back a little bit and let you work it out, let you struggle a little bit. Why? Because we want you to learn. We want you to grow and mature. And Jesus wants his disciples to grow in trust and faith by testing them here. And it looks like Philip still had some growing to do, and so do I. And that's okay. But let's see how the second disciple responds, Andrew. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up and he said, there's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, basically a lunch. But what good is that with this huge crowd? In other words, Andrew maybe had matured a little bit more than Philip, but not much. He turns to Jesus and he says, I tried to find some help, but it's not enough. The problem is too big. I asked others for help, but it's not enough. It's impossible. And then we get the third response. There's a little boy, a kid, just like many of you. Now let me ask you, kids, if your mom or your dad or grandma and grandpa packed you a little Lunchable, do you think that 3 or 4 crackers and some cheese cubes would feed all the hungry people from Corunna and Wyoming and what was the other one I said? Do you think your little Lunchable would feed all those people? No, you guys are pretty smart. You can figure that out, right? You know it's not enough, and I think the kid in this story was smart like you too. I bet you he knew that his snack wasn't enough to feed all these people, but he believed that Jesus could do something with it. And he was willing to help with whatever he had, and so he just gave it to Jesus. His response was, I know the problem is too big for me, but it's not too big for Jesus, and so I'm going to give him what I have. Adults in the room here, it's the kids who get it right in this story. It's the little boy who shows the most mature faith and trust in Jesus. And it's the adults who have to learn a lesson about faith from a child. Kids, do you know what Jesus thinks about you, what the Bible thinks about you? Here's a verse for you from 1 Timothy 4:12. It says, don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers. Show us older ones what it looks like to trust God in the way, in what you say and what you live, in your love, in your faith, and your purity. Jesus thinks pretty highly of you, kids. And he's saying that you kids can teach us adults a lesson in trusting God. Jesus takes this boy's little lunch, he uses it, and he multiplies it, and the story says that everyone had more than enough to eat. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Everyone was full, and there were still plenty of leftovers. Now think about this. Do you think Jesus needed the boys' lunch? No, probably not. Jesus could have just made bread fall from heaven or make it appear out of thin air, right? But he didn't. He used the young boy's offering and he multiplied that. You see, throughout the Bible, God always wants his people to participate with him. And so the lesson I want us to take home is this. When you're facing a problem that you know you can't solve on your own, let's not waste our time worrying about how big the problem is and how little we are. Instead, would we focus on how much bigger Jesus is, offer him whatever we have, even if it's a little, and trust him to do the rest? Alone, what we can offer may not seem like much, but in the hands of Jesus, he can use it and multiply it, and he says it is more than enough. I'm going to invite our worship team back up. But do you guys want to know what happened to my bathroom problem? At first, I admit, I responded like Philip. I panicked. I said, I can't do this. I don't have enough money. I don't know how to fix this. It's impossible. I can't hire a professional. But then I turned to Jesus and I told him, this problem is too big for me. I need your help. I'll offer what I have, but it's not much. This isn't my area. Do you know what God did with that? He sent me some friends from church who told me, hey, Rick, I heard you had a bathroom problem. We've done a few bathrooms before, and we can help. You just buy the material, and we'll come in after work on the evenings, and we'll fix it for you. That's my friend Eric and Christy. He's the covenant pastor at the Winnipeg Covenant Church, our sister church. And they remind me a lot of Jesus because they model trusting Jesus with the impossible things, and they always offer what they can. And look at how the bathroom turned out. Isn't that awesome? God is so good. God is bigger than our biggest problems. So let's pray. God, we thank you that you love us. We thank you that you see the kids, the little ones, the young ones. We thank you that you are patient with us, that you are compassionate. And God, we recognize that there are a lot of things in our world and in our life that we don't know how to solve. We can't fix on our own. And so, God, we just pray that you would help us trust. If there's a test, that we would learn to trust and obey you. God, would you provide what we can't, but would we not just be passive people who don't do anything? Would you show us and reveal us what do we have to offer and teach us to offer it to you? God, there are people in our community and in our city who are facing many things